We're meeting over Zoom because Megan is sick. If you want to listen,
Okay,
you're welcome to listen.
Just not taking a test. That's good.
No, no test today.
You could email me the Zoom link, that'd be good.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah, because good thing I have my earbuds, so perfect. I just listen in silence.
Yes.
How was this week? I mean, did people show up despite the snow?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, good. My kids were home. It's not good.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear.
Schools were closed. Never good for parents.
Yes, that's always tricky.
You get to date this summer?
No, unfortunately not.
Are you teaching them?
Yes. Okay, I sent you the link. What other classes are you taking?
Greek 300.
Nice.
Yeah, it's a lot of endings to memorize. I'm behind. I'm not a good student because I have to tend to my kids, and right now they need so much help with homework.
Mhm.
Homework. It's like a lot of things are hard for me. Like their math, I don't remember. My husband takes care of that.
Yes.
But they're both taking Latin is required in the school, so that's fun.
Yeah.
No, with
Hi, Megan. Can you hear me?
Hi. Yeah, hi.
Hi. I hope you feel better soon.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, thank you for being flexible.
I won't make you talk. Um,
Thanks. I can use the chat too.
yes, if you have any questions, please do use the chat. Um, all right. So today we're talking about two chapters of grammar. So we'll start with chapter 21 and then we'll do chapter 22. So I'm going to start out with our vocab from chapter 21. So first up, we have Aiel, which is a ram or a male goat. Make sure not to get it confused with Chayil, which is our word for strength, power, or army. After that, we have the verb bow. Bow means to come or go or enter. So this is going to be a super common verb that we're going to see. After that, we have the noun yain, which means wine. And it's actually the cognate word for our word for wine, which is kind of fun. It sort of traveled around the Mediterranean and then eventually made its way to us. After that, we have the verb mote, which means to die. It does weird stuff with its vowels, so watch out for this verb. After that, we have the noun mitzvah. Mitzvah. A mitzvah is a commandment or a law. Notice that in the plural, we have this weird thing going on where in meets vote, the vav is both acting as a consonant and as a carrier for the vowel at the same time. There are only a few words in Hebrew that do this, but watch out for this when it occurs. After that, we have the word navi, which means prophet. You'll see this very frequently. Then we have another verb, sur, sur. Sur is to turn aside, to turn around, to turn back. Pretty much anything you can think of that includes the word turn in it in English, you can use sur for that. It's used both in actual like spatial terms and also in kind of it's also used in metaphorical terms, like turning aside from evil or turning aside from the law of God. Next up, we have the noun avone. This is another of these funky nouns where the vav is acting both as the consonant and as a carrier for the vowel at the same time. So it's avone, avonote. Avone means sin, transgression, crime. Any kind of bad act that you can do can be described as an avone. After that, we have the noun pre. Pre is fruit. This isn't just the fruit that grows on trees. This can be any kind of growing thing that you can eat. It can be really described as a pre. So, olives are a pre, vegetables can be pre. So, it's a broader term than just the term fruit in English. After that, we have the title Paro. Paro is the king of Egypt, the pharaoh. Literally in Egyptian, this means the great house, so the Paro, but which is what you call the palace in Egyptian. But for some reason, they decided, you know what, this is what we're going to call the king of Egypt. After that, we have another verb, kum. Kum is to get up or arise. Then we have the adjective rasha, wicked or evil. So it's got the resh at the beginning and the ayin at the end, kind of like our ra that we already know. So rasha. Then we have two more verbs. We have shuv, which means to return. Again, this can be spatial, like actually returning from a place, and it can also be metaphorical in the sense of repenting from doing bad stuff. Then we have seem. Seem is to put or place, and that is our last word. Now, when you look at all of these words, you may see we have a number of verbs which have a weak consonant in the middle. So we have bow, moat, sewer, cum, shuv, and seam. All of these are second weak verbs. So that's kind of warning you. This chapter is mostly going to be about how to handle second weak verbs. Now, they make this all seem much more complicated than it really needs to be. Let's just go down to the summary chart on page 230 and take a look at how this ends up looking. So our prefixes and suffixes are all going to be normal here. There's not going to be surprises in that side of things. So really the only thing that you need to keep track of for these hollow roots, these second weak verb roots, is what forms are they going to drop their second weak root letter in, and what forms are they going to keep it in. So if we take a look at these forms, we see that in the perfect, we get our shavti, shavta, shaft, shav, shava, shavnu, shavtem, shavten, shavu, shavu. So in the perfect, what's happened is they've dropped the second weak root letter. So this is from our root shuv, to return. They've dropped the second weak root letter, and we just have that regular ah vowel that we expect for the perfect. So in the perfect, we drop the second weak root letter. The same thing is going to happen in the participle. So if you look over at the participles there on the left, you can see that instead of getting something like chauvave, which I guess is what you would want for your masculine singular participle, we've lost our second root letter, and we just get shav, shava, shavim, shavot. So, we find that you're going to drop the second weak in the perfect and in the participle. So in the two types of form that start with P, we drop that second weak root letter. Now, there's one thing here I want to point out, and that is this. Our plural participles, these aren't too bad. They have their eam and their oat on them, so you can kind of see that they have to be acting in a more nouny, adjective-y way because they've got these noun and adjective endings on them. Where the problem is with the participles is in the singular ones. So if you look at the shav and the shava for the participle, so like returning, the returning male, the returning female, then look down at the perfect, third masculine singular, and third feminine singular. And you can see he returned and she returned are shav and shava. This is going to happen for all of your second week verbs. The singular participles and the third singular perfect forms are going to be the same. So this is going to be annoying. Now, normally in context, it's going to be very clear what's going on. It's going to be clear which kind of translation you want, whether you want to say he returned or returning, whether you want to say she returned or returning. But once in a while, especially in poetry, you won't be able to tell. And just rest in the fact that the medieval Masoretic rabbis couldn't tell either. So it's just one of those things. All right. So we've just seen that we're going to drop our second week root letter in the perfect and the participle. When are we going to keep our second week root letter? We're going to keep it here first in the imperfect. So if you look at the imperfect column, you can see that we've kept our second week root letter and we get ashuv, tashuv, tashuvi, yashuv, tashuv, nashuv, tashuvu, whatever's going on in the feminine plural form here, then yashuvu, and then this again. Now, the plural feminine forms, the second feminine plural and the third feminine plural, these are very rare, and the Hebrew scribes really can't decide on what they should look like. So you might see teshuvena, you might see teshuvena with the actual u in there. You might see teshovna. You don't really know. There's no real agreement on these forms because they're just so rare. So just look for the t at the beginning, the na at the end, and that'll tell you what type of form it is. And then if you can identify the root, you'll be fine. Don't worry too much about the vowels in this thing. So in general, in the imperfect, we're keeping our second week root letter. Okay? Now, in the command forms, the imperatives, we're also, of course, going to keep our second week root letters because, as we remember, the imperative forms, the command forms, are based on the imperfect forms. So we have like our tashuv, and to make the command, we just took the tav off, so we got shuv. We took our tashuvi, you will return, and we just took the tav off and got shuvi. So of course, our imperative forms are also going to keep that second week root letter. In the infinitives, once again, we're keeping our second week root letter. So if we're doing an infinitive construct, so an infinitive that has a l or a b or a k on it, like this one here has a l, then we're going to keep it. We're going to get lashuv or bashuv or kashuv. In the infinitive absolute, the infinitive of emphasis, we keep the second week root letter and we get that O vowel, which is kind of what you want in an infinitive absolute. So for example, if I had my infinitive absolute of shamar, it would be shamor with that O vowel between the second and third root letter. So we're getting that O vowel here in the infinitive of emphasis. So we've seen you drop the second week root letter in the perfect and the participle, but we keep the second week root letter in the imperfect, in the infinitive, and in the imperative. So we drop the second week root letter in the two P's, and we keep the second week root letter in the three I's. That's how I remember whether I need to keep it in there or not. Yeah? Now, there are a couple of little wrinkles with this. So I'm going to scroll back up a second here. Um, if you look at the second week verbs in the imperfect at the bottom of page 228, here they go across and they show you a whole bunch of different roots. So we just looked at the paradigm for shuv, right? And here they give you a couple of other different second week verbs to look at. So basically, the thing to note here is that if you have a verb with a yod in the middle instead of a vav in the middle, it's going to look like seem does over there on the left. So instead of getting an oo between the second and third root letters, we're getting our yod, and we end up with asim, tasim, tasimi. So we just keep that e vowel, right? So that's pretty easy to remember. The thing that's a little bit trickier is for the verbs which have a vav in the middle, most of them have an u vowel in the middle, like shuv does. Once in a while, though, you get one like bo, right here, to come or go, which has an o sound in the middle. So instead of getting an oo kept in the paradigm in the set of verb forms, we're going to get an o vowel. So we get avo, tavo, tavoi, yavo, tavo, navo, etc. So my recommendation is when you make your flashcards for these verbs or however you learn them, with these hollow verbs, note down what vowel they like as part of your flashcard entry. So that way you'll remember that shuv has an oo sound and bo has an o sound. So most of these second weeks, they're going to be oos. Occasionally you get o's. Then we have the verb mote. The verb mote, unfortunately, is very irregular in terms of its vowels. So you can see that in the imperfect, we're getting an oo vowel. So we're thinking, oh, this is just moot. It has a nice oo vowel in the middle. Unfortunately, let me turn this. If you then go back and look at the perfects on page 227, you can see that sometimes we're getting these forms with sere in them. Mate, meta, metu. And we're also getting our final tav of the root has merged together with the tav of the perfect endings. That's why it looks like this, mati, mata. So in particular, thinking about these a vowels that are appearing in the perfect and that also will appear in the participle, basically what happened was back in the mists of time, there were two different roots floating around for the word death. There were both the root moot and the root meet. And in different languages, they kind of had a different preference and they used one or the other. Now, because these languages were all kind of right next to each other and communicating with one another, what eventually happened is these two roots kind of merged together. And so in some parts of the chart for moot, you'll see them getting the oo vowel, and sometimes you'll see them getting a more a type vowel as if it was from the root meet. So this is just very pesky. So just make a note for yourself that the vowels for moot are irregular. Okay. There's one more little wrinkle for our second week verbs, and then we'll know everything we need to know about them. And this has to do with clipped forms. So this is on the bottom of page 229. So we've already seen clipped forms a little bit before. We've seen them in third week verbs, in particularly the reversed imperfect, also known as the Waagtaal preterite, right? And here we're going to see that this clipping is going to affect not just third week verbs, but also second week verbs in the same environment. So this environment of the reversed imperfect or Waagtaal preterite, whatever you want to call it. And this is affecting the third week and the second week verbs. So if we look here, we can see that when you just have a regular imperfect form, we're of course keeping our second week root letter, because we remember we keep the second week root letter in the 3 types of forms beginning with I, and we drop it in the 2 types of forms beginning with P. Okay, so if we had Yamut, it kept it. However, if we do the reversed imperfect thing and we put the Vav in front of it to say, and he died, we get Vayamat. So we've lost our second week root letter. If we had Yasur, he will turn aside, imperfect. In the preterite, we get Vayasar, and he turned aside. Again, we lost it. So this is what you're going to see throughout these second week forms. So Yakum becomes Vayakam, Yeshuv becomes Vayashav, Yasim becomes Vayasem. We've lost our second week form. Now, along with this, they very helpfully point something out to you. And this is that you have to watch out for the difference between forms of the verb shuv, to return, and forms of the verb yeshav, to sit. Okay? So both of these verbs have a weak letter. So both of them have situations where all you'll see will be the shin and the bet. And also, because the first week of Yeshav is a yod, that looks exactly the same, of course, as a third person imperfect prefix. So, for example, Vayeshav is and he returned, but Yeshav is he sat. Vayeshav is and he will sit. Vayeshev is and he sat. Yeshev would be he will sit. So you have to kind of watch out for these. Frequently, students will bring me homework and be like, I couldn't figure out what the sentence means, and it will be because they've put the wrong one of these 2 options into their translation. So watch out for this. This is tricky. Okay, so we've talked about the basic form of second week verbs. We've seen that they drop their second week root letter in the 2 P's and they keep it in the 3 I's. We've seen that depending on the verb, it may have an U, an O, or an E in the middle when it does keep it. And we've also seen with the clipped forms that when you're in this Waagtaal preterite, we will lose our second week consonant. So that's that piece of grammar. There's one more little piece of grammar in this chapter, and that is on page 231. So this is very simple. This is the question ha. So we have already learned in Biblical Hebrew a number of question words. So we already know how to say who, we say me. We know how to say what or how, we say ma. We'll eventually learn some more question words as well. But what about questions that don't have who, where, which, why, when? What about questions that don't have those things in them? Well, in Hebrew, you can just start your question by putting a ha at on the first word of your question. And it very specifically is this ha with the reduced patach. So if you look at the examples, we can ask, Hadavid Sham? Is David there? We can ask, Hazakartem et Tamakom? Did you remember the place? We can ask, Hashomer achi anochi? Am I my brother's keeper? So you just put the ha on whatever word is the first in the question. So that's how you do it. So look for that ha with reduced patach. It's very difficult to get a ha with a reduced patach at the beginning of a word unless it's this question ha. This is especially helpful once we start reading real Hebrew, which doesn't have punctuation in it. This is very nice. It tells you, hey, we're starting a question now. Okay, so in this chapter, chapter 21, we learned about our second week verbs and we learned about the question ha. I'll give you a second in case you want to put any questions about any of that in the chat. If you don't have any question, okay, here we go. Is the O vowel for the imperfect due to the guttural? Oh, in bow? Um, hmm. I don't think that could have something to do with it, but there are other roots that have gutturals that have an oo vowel. So I don't think that's going to predict it for you. Do you have any other questions or is that good? Okay. In that case, we will move on to chapter 22. So this is our 2-chapter grammar week. Sorry for the scrolling here. So if we're on page 241 at the beginning of chapter 22, let's take a look at our vocabulary. Okay, starting at the top of the right-hand column, our first word is or, meaning light. So we now know O, which means or, which means light. So that's kind of fun. Next up, we have emet. Emet means truth or righteousness or order or the way things ought to be. You'll see it, of course, very frequently. This is a feminine noun. Notice the nice feminine tav at the end of it. We're going to see in this chapter and in chapters beyond that a lot of abstract ideas in Hebrew are going to end up being feminine. Next up, we have aron. Aron literally just means box, but it's used so overwhelmingly for a particular box in the Hebrew Bible that they just gloss it here for you as the ark. So literally it just means box. Next up, we have boker, which means morning. Then we have berit. Again, it's a feminine noun. Notice this feminine tav at the end, and it's kind of abstract. So berit means an agreement, a covenant, a contract. Anytime when two people get together and agree, we're going to do some certain things or not do certain things, that's a berit in the Hebrew Bible. Next up, we have the word dor, meaning generation. This is very frequently used for generations of descendants for the future. Notice that even though this is a masculine noun, it has an ot ending for the plural, so this is annoying. After that, we have chodesh. Chodesh means month. It's actually from a root chadash, which means new, because the month starts whenever the moon is new. So it's very much tied to the lunar calendar, the calendar of the moon. Now over at the top of the other column, our first word is chen. Chen is favor or grace. This element gets used in an awful lot of Hebrew names, like the name Hannah, Hannah, or the name Yochanan, John. It's a very, very popular name element. After that, we have the word moed. A moed is an appointed time, um, like for a religious festival or for a legal meeting. So it's not like a regular meeting, like I met up with my friend. This is, hey, we set up ahead of time to have a court case, or we set up ahead of time to have some kind of religious meeting or something like that. That's usually what a moed is. This word is most frequently used in Biblical Hebrew in the phrase Ohel Moed, which they give you there under idioms. The Ohel Moed, the tent of meeting, is the place where Moses met with God during the time that the Israelites were wandering around in Sinai and then wandering around in the wilderness. So Moses would go in there and meet with God and discuss matters. Next up in the vocab list, we have safar. Safar means to count. Um, so you can think about you're counting up how many things you have so far. There are a lot of nouns that we're going to learn soon that are based on this root, like sefer for scroll and sofer for scribe. So this is a very useful root. Next up, we have the noun avodah. Avodah means work or service. Again, notice it's this kind of abstract noun, and so it is feminine. We already know the noun eved for a servant or slave, which of course is from the same root. After that, we have erev, that means evening, to go along with our boker, morning. We have kerev, which means inward part or midst or intestines. Just like toch, this gets combined with prepositions quite a bit. So we get bekerev, in the midst of, mikerev, from the midst of. And then our last word that we get is shavar, to break. Down here in the idioms section, they give you one more important idiom using our new word chen. So frequently in the Hebrew Bible, you will find this phrase to matzah chen be'enei of somebody. That is to find favor in the eyes of somebody. So they think you've done a good job, they like you, you found favor in their eyes. So, for example, Rachel matzah chen be'enei Yaakov, Rachel found favor in the eyes of Jacob, and thus he married her. So that's our vocab here. Now, in this chapter, there are basically two grammatical things. One of them is not going to be any kind of surprise. We're going to start with the second one, which is on page 243. So the main burden of this chapter has to do with how do we put our pronoun endings, our possessive pronoun endings on plural nouns. Now, we've already talked about possessive pronoun endings quite a bit, so I don't think any of this will be very surprising. So we already know that if you have your possessive pronoun endings and you're adding them on a noun that ends with a consonant, like the singular bane they give you on page 243, we already know what shape those endings will have. You get bini, bincha, binech, bino, bina, binenu, binchem, binchen, binam, binam. So very simple. We've also seen when we added these endings to prepositions that when we added endings to prepositions which ended in a vowel, the shape of some of these endings was a little bit different. And the same thing is going to be true as we add these endings to plural nouns like banim. As we know, when you're adding these endings, you add them to the construct form, not the regular form. So the construct form of banim would be b'nai with a tsere yod ending. So it has a vowel ending on it. So because you're taking your e, ha, ha, o, ha, whatever, and you're adding them to a noun that is now ending in a vowel, the shape of some of these is a little bit different, right? So if you want to say my sons, you say banai with that patach yod. If you want to say his sons, you say banav. So we've still got that vav at the end, but instead of it being O, like in Bano, his son, we get banav as a consonant. If we want to say her sons, we say baneha. If we want to say their sons, we say benehem. If we want to say their feminine sons, we say benehen. So just as we saw with the prepositions, when you're adding these endings to something that ends in a vowel, the forms you need to watch out for are your first singular my form, and then your third singular forms for his, her, and their. Those are the ones where they're a little bit different. Now, the other thing to keep in mind here is, what if you're reading along in your Hebrew and you run across bincha versus banecha? How are you going to know how many sons there are? What you're going to do is you're going to look and you're going to see, where is there a yod? Is there a yod? If there's a yod, you've got multiple sons. If there's not a yod, it's just one son. So that's going to tell you how many sons there are. Maybe I'm looking along and I find some verses about some kings, and one of them says Malko, Malko, without a yod. That has to be one king because there's no yod, so it's just his king. Maybe I am reading along and I find Malkov, Malkov with a yod. In that case, it has to be multiple kings, so his kings. So look for the yod. That'll tell you how many of this there are. Okay, so this is nice and straightforward. With your masculine plurals, the construct form ends in tsere yod, so we use these endings that we use for going after vowels. That's fine. What happens with the feminine plural? Here, there's something rather unfortunate, okay? So, as we know, the feminine plural is banot, and the feminine plural construct is just banot, just keeps that ot ending. So you would think that you could just use the endings that go after a consonant. Here's the really unfortunate thing. Look at this paradigm for a second of the feminine plural nouns here on page 244. Do you see how there are yods? There are all these yods after the ot ending. So for some reason, at some point, the ancient Canaanites decided that they were going to put a yod in here after their feminine plural construct form, and then they were going to add the endings. Because they put the yod in there first, this means they're now going to use the endings that you use for going after a vowel, because they're now coming after this vowel that didn't need to be there. So I'm a little salty about this. So we get benotai, benotecha, benotaich, benotav, benoteha, benotenu, benotechem, benotechen, benotehem, benotehen, like so. So this is something to watch out for. So I guess, once again, look for a yod, it'll tell you it's plural if the ot ending didn't already do so. Okay, so that's the kind of main piece of grammar in this chapter. Then they give you a second piece of grammar. Let me get this page turned around. So we're back on page 241. Basically, here they're showing you how to add these pronoun endings to some words that either you might not have expected to take pronoun endings or that look weird when they do. So let's start with kol all the way over on the left side there. So kol, which means all, every, each, words like that, everything, everyone, those can all be kol. You can easily imagine that it would be useful to be able to say all of it, all of them, all of us. These are things people are going to want to be able to say. So it's great to be able to add our pronoun endings to this. Now, the pronoun endings that you use here are just the perfectly normal endings that go after a word that ends in a consonant. So the problem here is not the endings. So it's not the endings that are idiomatic here, it's the word itself. So if you look at this, you're getting, like, for all of me, this weird form, kuli, where we suddenly have a kibbutz vowel, and then we have a dogish in the lamed. So the dogish in the lamed, it's just because kol is originally from a root kalal. And so when you add endings, as we've seen before, the historical second lamed is coming back. Why we have an u vowel here in the first syllable, I have no idea. It's just weird. So just be able to recognize these forms, that these are from kol. They're not some weird alternative thing, despite their bizarre vowels. Kulo, in particular, is so common that when you make your flashcards or whatever you do, I might recommend that you give it its own flashcard entry, and that'll also help you to remember this weird vowel pattern for kol plus endings. Okay, let's go to the middle column. In the middle column, we have our friend hine. Hine literally is behold, but sometimes in English we translate it as something like here is something. It's basically like behold, look, pay attention. It's an attention-grabbing word. So you can take hine and you can add the different pronoun endings to hine the way we see here. So you can say hineni, you can say hincha, hinach, hino, hina, hinenu, hinchem, hinam. So you can just add your regular endings to hine. Now, most of these forms are pretty rare and you won't see them very much, but hineni is super common. So this is another one where it's worth giving it its own flashcard entry. Hineni, in particular, if maybe you're someone with authority is calling for you. So the king is calling for you, your parents are calling for you, God is calling for you, and they are like, hey, Samuel. And you're like, oh, Hineni, here I am. This is also kind of the ancient Hebrew version of I, sir. So if someone gives you an order, you don't say yes, you say, here I am, to say, okay, I'm going to do this thing. I heard you, I'm going to do the thing. So you'll see Hineni a lot. Finally, we have ein, which means there is not. We know this guy isn't a verb and it turns up in verbless sentences. So, for example, ein li behema, I don't have an animal. Or ein anashim ba'ir, there are not men in the city. We know it turns up in these verbless sentences. Now you can add your pronoun endings to this as well in order to say, I am not, you are not, he is not, she is not, etc. Just be able to recognize these forms. They're a little funky looking. So we get a neni, a ncha, a nech, a nenu, a nana, etc. So just be able to recognize these forms. In particular, watch out for the two a nenu forms. We have an a nenu, he is not, and we have an a nenu, we are not. So they both look the same. This is like what happened with me menu, right? From him or from us. For some reason, even though this one should be a no, it's a nenu. I don't know why. It just did this. Maybe give that one its own flashcard entry so you can remember it. On page 242, they just give you some examples of what using these things can look like. In particular, just to point out in the very middle of the page under ein, they show you sometimes sentences can end up being a little funky when you've used ein this way with the pronoun endings. So they give you here, Yaakov einenu bincha. Literally, Jacob, he is not your son. So, um, this is a little weird, right? Because we've got the he on here referring back to Jacob. We're basically saying that part twice. Jacob, he is not your son. Um, I feel like it would have been easier to just say Yaakov lo bincha, but I guess they didn't feel like doing that. Here's another example. Ha'ish einenu ro'eh. So the man, he is not seeing. The man is not seeing. You can also use it this way. Again, you would think it would be much easier to say ha'ish lo ro'eh, and you may see that sometimes, but here they did something a little bit different. So you'll sometimes genuinely see this kind of thing. All right. I'll give you a second to, in case you have any questions about the grammar from this chapter. Okay. Um, do you have any burning questions from your homework that you feel like you need to have answered in order to keep moving forward? Take a look at your homework, see if there's anything um, that you wanted to talk about or write about. I'm going to switch over to the file that has chapter 20 in it. Chapter 19, exercise 7, number 4. Yes, let me get back there. Do, do, do. Go, chapter 19. Exercise 7, number 4. Yes. So here we have V'yomer lo, lech na re'eh et shalom achicha ve'et shalom hatzon. So, and he said to me, lech, go, from halach, it's the imperative. And then they have the na in here. They gloss it as please. It doesn't mean please. As we learned, na is just the modal marker. It's telling you you're dealing with some kind of modal verb. It can either be an imperative or it could be an imperfect that is specifically modal. So let us do something, we shall do something, we might do something. So lechna is just go. Ra'eh, see, et shalom achicha, the peace of your brothers, but et shalom hatzon, and the peace of the flock. So basically, Joseph is being asked by his father to go check on his brothers who are out watching over the flocks and see how they're doing. Other ones that you'd like us to talk about?